I'm not really afraid of dying anymore. I mean, I think you should be afraid of dying. Like, I probably should be afraid of dying. A healthy fear of death and loss of life is a perfectly normal thing that is good for most people. Um, but my relationship with death is just kind of unusual. I mean, for most of my life, I've woken up each morning not breathing. When most people go to brew a cup of coffee, I'm usually doing a nebulizer treatment and intaking albuterol so I can, breathe for a little bit. This is a story about chronic illness, like at its heart. And if you know people like me who've dealt with chronic illnesses, we spend so much time learning about the ways that we're sick that it's almost like we can feel our own clock ticking down. And because of this, the relationship I have with time and mortality has really shifted and changed compared to a lot of the people I know. Most people know of death in this sort of abstract way. They think of it as a concept, they experience loss and try to make sense of it. But my relationship with death is a lot closer. I mean, at this point, it's like we've already been engaged. When I think about and hear about people talking about end of life, right? How they want to experience their elderly years, I often hear people talk a lot about dying a peaceful death, surrounded by their loved ones. And the thing I have to face is that no matter how badly I want my death to be peaceful, it won't be that easy. My death will be a fight that I've fought 1,000 times before. So, at its core, this is a video about death. And unlike many of the videos I make, it's not one that I'm making for myself, it's actually one that I have to make for others. Because so often in my life, the people around me ask me a certain kind of question, and they all sound kind of similar. They ask me why I can't slow down, why it is that I'm so bad at just stopping. And the answer is pretty straightforward. When people talk about taking your time, in my case at least, I don't have as much as most people. I'm really sick. I've been sick my entire life since I was born. And that's where this story starts. Immediately after my mother had given birth, there were complications. I wasn't breathing correctly. There was something wrong. And the nurses got me stabilized. My mom made sure I was okay. And this was in a time period where, after having had 4 other children, my mother had a great connection with a pediatric doctor, our family doctor. What she did at the time of my birth was put the phone up to my chest so the doctor on the other side could listen. And he said, with very little thought and a perfect observation, "Oh crap, this kid has asthma." Which I want to address before I even continue. The stereotype of the kid with asthma is like some kid that's mildly inconvenienced and has to use an inhaler occasionally. And I think that's perfectly accurate for the vast majority of cases. There are many types of asthma, and I have one that's considered chronic. So I was born with this, and I will die with this too. And the fact of the matter is, that actually already happened once. From birth to the age of 8, I would have asthma attacks, and I could pull out of them with medical intervention. But as I got older, I started rolling dice and circumstance started adding up. It was at 8 years old that I had an asthma attack that was different. We went to treat it like we always do, and it didn't get better. It kept getting worse. And so this was the first of many experiences I would have where I would end up hospitalized, but this was actually the worst. I don't remember much of what led up to it at this point, because for the majority of this, I was neither conscious, and at one point, I wasn't alive. Things I can remember are patchworks of memories, some of which I've learned as an adult were actually hallucinations. I remember being at home midday like normal. I had an asthma attack, it was getting really bad, and then suddenly I'm in an ambulance. And the ambulance, this is the 90s, this is not the 90s, this is the mid-2000s, right? This is like 2006, I suppose. But the aesthetic inside of the ambulance at the time, it had a fish wallpaper, right? So the inside of this ambulance had a wallpaper that looked like fishes swimming around the ocean. And that's because it was an ambulance from Cincinnati Children's Hospital, which is one of the biggest hospitals in Ohio, of course, in Cincinnati. It's a really great pediatric care center. Well, I'm in the back of this ambulance. I don't have much to think. I'm 8 years old, so I'm not having many deep thoughts. But due to hypoxia, a lack of oxygen getting to my brain, I remember to this day that there was a literal aquarium inside of that ambulance, and the fish were actually swimming, and they looked beautiful. And I was entertained, and I loved them. I was a kid that was fascinated with all kinds of biology and science and anything like that. So I'm in the back of this ambulance on my way to die, and I see these fish that I think are swimming around, but I'm hallucinating. I'm actually going under. And the last thing I remember in the ambulance is that I did. And an indeterminate period of time passed, and I woke up in the hospital, and I had to be resuscitated. I wasn't there for it. Whatever I am and whatever makes me me was gone for some period of time. And the next thing I knew, I was at Cincinnati Children's Hospital, and I have these weirdly peaceful memories of unusual medical experiences. I remember they had to put in an IV to my wrist at the time. And the weirdest thing I remember, which this might be a hallucination too, is that the IV went into my arm solid and came out flimsy. I don't know what it is they did, but it was blue and flimsy. And I remember eventually being able to walk again after a day or so. And we went downstairs. I had my IV with its little rolly case thing. And at some point I ate some scrambled eggs, and I ate for the first time in 2 days. And those scrambled eggs were the most delicious things I'd ever eaten in my entire life. And to this day, I talk about hospital scrambled eggs, which I'm sure adults would argue are not that tasty. But I guess whatever it is I went through at that time made those scrambled eggs with some salt on them really delicious. You see, around 8 years old is when this all started. The reason that I'm so certain that I don't have as much time as most people is that every year from the age of 8 to 18, I had another hospitalization. And they all usually had a similar cause. It was usually the fact that I had gotten a respiratory infection, a cold, which for most people is nothing, but for me is a literal death sentence. The one time it worked, and the 8 other times, the 10 other times that it hospitalized me. 11 and 12, 9 and 10, these ages, I have more of these hospitalizations. And it's around 12 years of age that I like to often say that I sort of woke up. And it wasn't just to my own mortality, it was in general. I realized a lot of things at that age. And one of the things I realized is that when I die, that's it. There is no second chance. When I die, that's it. I'm gone. And it's the same as going to sleep as if you didn't dream. Because the only way I remember what happened to me when I was a kid is it was like going to sleep and not remembering what happened during those 8 hours. Except those 8 hours are eternity. there's nothing. There's no feeling, there's no thought, there's no pain, there's no happiness, there's no perspective or subject. There is nothing to observe and nothing to be observed. In my mind, because of my experiences, death is just the end. And that's not a good thing. That's not something to aspire towards or want to experience. In fact, everything I've ever experienced is owed to the fact that I am still alive. Years go by. I come to understand that I'm mortal at a very young age. And even in my teenage years, around 14, 15, and 16, I realize that death is not a good thing. It is simply a pause and an end where there is no replaying. There is no pressing the play button again. It's just a pause forever that you can't even comprehend. As I grew older and I hit my most hormonal periods and some of the hardest challenges I would face as an adolescent, I struggled with depression and suicide and self-harm. And one of the contributing factors was that I understood in my own worldview that death was an end. And if things are awful, then maybe it could make them stop. And so there were times during those years where I would attempt to take my own life. And if you pay enough attention and you look at me closely, you will see the side effects of those choices on me. Now, the good thing is that I'm not there anymore. I don't see death as a solution to that problem, though I am ever haunted by the memory that it is an end. When I'm suffering, it doesn't slip my mind that it will end eventually. Though similarly, when I am happy, I am also aware that it will end as well. These experiences of being sick shaped me into a person who, around the age of 17, decided that I would have to dedicate the rest of my life to working as hard and as quickly as possible to achieve the things that I want to achieve within my lifetime. And so from 17 on, I've just been busy, because the way that I assume is that I don't have as much time as most people. So then, at first, my experience with death simply made me understand my own mortality. And later, it became a poor excuse to think that ending my own life was a good idea. And then, as a young adult, it became my motivation for working hard and quickly, because I know that end is coming and it is permanent. That leads me back to the original point of this video. What is it I'm trying to tell other people in this video? What is it I'm trying to explain? Well, I'm going to have to get medical for a short period. Asthma is an immune response. It's an inflammatory illness. The tubes and tissue inside of my lungs respond to pretty much everything by becoming inflamed, constricting my airways and making it difficult to breathe. So, throughout my life, I've had asthma attacks, and not just a couple, and not every now and again. My asthma is so chronic and it's historically been so poorly treated that I've had enough asthma attacks now that I've lost lung tissue. It's called pulmonary fibrosis. It's what happens when you inflame the skin inside of your lungs again and again and again, and it turns to scarring. It changes its physiology into a different shape that makes it less effective at actually doing gas exchange, getting oxygen into my bloodstream, getting carbon dioxide back out. I'm missing about 30% of my lung capacity, and I'm 25 years old, which means that when I'm in my 50s, and if I make it to my 60s, I will have no mobility. I won't be able to do anything, and it will take one infection to take me out for good. Unless between now and then lung transplants and stem cell research flourishes such that they can just reset my lungs permanently, I've been told by my doctors plainly that my end of life will not be long and it will probably not be very good. Now, that's being a bit dramatic. My doctors have told me that there are things I can do to make that better. There are habits and practices, and most importantly and expensively, medications that I can use to extend my lifespan and make it so my quality of life as I reach the end is better. Which probably makes you wonder, how the hell did it get so bad and I'm only 25? And the answer is actually pretty straightforward. I grew up really broke. I mention it in every goddamn video, and you're probably sick of it by now. But let's talk about the intersection of poverty and health. Guess what? Unsurprisingly, medication is really expensive. There are medications that probably could have saved me from developing the lungs that I currently have, but from the ages of 8 to 18, we sure didn't have money for them. They're called corticosteroids. You've probably taken one at some point. There's one called prednisone. You can't take prednisone permanently. Few people can, and it's only for very severe illnesses where prednisone works out for them. You can't take it every day for asthma. Eventually, steroids like that will have negative side effects. And so in time, corticosteroids, which are inhaled styles of steroids, became popular. The most popular brand I can think of is called Symbicort. You may also know of something called Advair. Both of these medications 10 years ago were incredibly expensive. And even now, to this day, with my health insurance as a teacher, it's $200 an inhaler just so I can walk slightly better, and I'm already missing 30% of my lung capacity. So I have to be open with you. My relationship with my illness and disease is a really stupid one. The reason I had so many asthma attacks as a kid is because I kept pushing it. Because it's really hard to accept that you're so different from your peers that even basic things like running 10 feet is hard for you. And so when I was a kid, I kept pushing it. And I knew what was going to happen. I'd end up in the hospital again and again and again. Ambulances, nebulizer treatments, running out of medication that my family couldn't even afford. And it's because I was a stupid, bullheaded kid that just couldn't slow down. And I guess that explains why now, as an adult, I still can't stop. I think you could leverage a lot of psychology when it comes to looking at how childhood near-death experiences affect people's development. And in my case, I think it made me a lot more existential. Like, you know, I was a little kid and thinking about these things that I think many kids don't get a chance to think about. Maybe if you experienced loss from a young age, which I actually hadn't. I've spent most of my life being the one who keeps almost dying, as opposed to losing people I know myself. If you've lost someone before, maybe you'll understand how it changes your perspective on time and how it is you're spending your life and what it is you're doing with your life. In a lot of ways, I really hate how sick I am. The little kid inside of me is still pretty pissed that I can't run that far and that I can't keep up with everyone else. But I think the adult that's in front of you now is grateful because instead of it feeling like I'm the one who's lagging behind, I look around now and it feels like I'm really far ahead. Because I know my time is limited. And so I'm moving as quick as I can.